We changed the locks. Go to a hotel, my son yelled from the second-floor window, laughing with a coldness that froze the blood in my veins. I am Martha. I am 71 years old, and I spent the last 3 decades taking care of every corner of that house and the family that was now slamming the door in my face. What Mark did not know, while he mocked me from behind the glass, was that the true control of that property was never in the piece of metal he had just changed out of pure ignorance. Just a few hours before my world split in two, the morning had begun with the same silent routine of the past 5 years. I woke up at 5:30 when the sky was still a dark purple stain over the neighborhood roofs. The house was submerged in absolute silence, that heavy early morning silence that only the old and the insomniac know. I walked barefoot down the hallway so as not to make the wooden floorboards creak, feeling the cold of the floor rising through my ankles. My knees, worn out by age and humidity, protested with a dull crack, but I ignored them. A mother's love, or at least love as I understood it, does not stop for joint pain. Love is what is done in the dark, while others rest, so that when they open their eyes, they find the world a little softer, a little easier to navigate. I reached the kitchen and turned on the small light hanging over the sink. I took out the old coffee maker, the one Mark had told me 1,000 times to throw away, because it clashed with the modern decor that his wife, Rachel, wanted to impose on the house. But that coffee maker made the best strong coffee, exactly how they liked it to wake up. I measured the dark grounds with precision, poured the purified water, and turned on the stove. While the bitter and comforting aroma began to fill the space, I took out a ceramic bowl to prepare the dough for the meat pies. Mark always said that Tuesdays were bearable at the car dealership where he worked, only if he took my homemade meat pies for lunch. My hands, full of brown spots and with knuckles swollen from arthritis, moved with the mechanical memory of decades of work. I mixed the flour, the shortening, and the warm water. I kneaded with force, leaning the weight of my shoulders onto the counter. In every movement there was a silent devotion. It was my way of telling them that they mattered, that I was there to support them. I prepared the lunch boxes, cut the crusts off the bread for my grandson Nicholas's sandwich, and ironed the small school uniform that had been left wrinkled in the hamper the night before. I did all of this without letting out a single sigh of complaint. By 7 in the morning, when I heard Rachel's first footsteps coming down the stairs, breakfast was served, steaming and perfect, on the dining room table. No one said thank you that morning. Rachel took her cup of coffee without looking me in the eyes, sliding her finger across her cell phone screen. Mark came down in a rush, grabbed the lunchbox I handed him, and gave me a distracted kiss on the cheek, a cold brush that I barely felt. Nicholas, half asleep, was the only one who smiled at me with his mouth stained with jelly, before his mother pulled him by the hand to take him to the car. I stood on the porch, wiping my hands on my apron, watching them drive down the street until the car disappeared at the corner. The house was left empty, returning the echo of my own footsteps to me. That house was not just a building of bricks and cement to me. It was the grand project of my life. Anthony, my late husband, and I bought it 40 years ago, when it was nothing more than a half-finished structure in a neighborhood that was barely starting to be paved. Anthony spent every weekend of his adult life painting walls, fixing pipes, installing the windows, and planting the front garden. I sewed the original curtains, picked out every bathroom tile, and polished the hardwood floors until my knees bled. When Anthony died 15 years ago, from a massive heart attack while pruning the rose bush he loved so much, I felt like my world was ending. He left me an immense emptiness, a modest widow's pension, and this house. To survive the pain, I clung to the walls, the garden, and our only son, Mark. 5 years ago, Mark lost his job in the city and his rented apartment. He arrived at my door on a rainy night with a pregnant Rachel and a bunch of suitcases, with the broken look of a defeated man. "Mom, it will just be for a few months until I get back on my feet," he told me at the door. I did not hesitate for a second. I opened my arms and the doors of my home. I gave them the master bedroom, the one I had shared with Anthony, with its private bathroom and large picture window. I moved into the sewing room at the back of the house, a small, dark space near the kitchen, where a twin bed and a closet barely fit. The months turned into years. Mark got a job, but their savings never seemed to be enough for them to move out. Rachel started complaining about the dust, about my antique furniture, about the way I cooked. Little by little, I shrank in my own house so as not to be a bother, turning into an invisible presence, a silent maid who paid with her labor and her pension for the right not to be alone. A mother makes herself small so that her children can grow big. That was the lie I repeated to myself every night in front of the mirror. At 9 in the morning that Tuesday, I took my plaid canvas shopping cart and headed out to the local market. The sun was already high and the heat was starting to bounce off the asphalt. I walked the 8 blocks that separated me from the food stalls. Every step was an effort. My right knee gave me sharp twinges and my breath was short, but the mental grocery list pushed me forward. I had to buy special ground beef, completely lean because Rachel was disgusted by chewing on gristle. I had to find the reddest and firmest tomatoes for the lunch sauce. And I wanted to stop by the bakery to buy Nicholas some butter cookies, his favorites, with the little money I had left from my bi-weekly check. The market was full of noise, smelling of ripe fruit and fresh fish. I greeted the butcher, a kind man who always saved me the best cuts. "Martha, what an early bird and hard worker as always," he told me while wrapping the meat in white butcher paper. "You have to feed the family," I replied, with a smile that took effort to maintain. I paid with crumpled bills that I pulled from my cloth coin purse. At every stall, I left a little of my energy and my scarce resources, all destined to make the people sleeping under my roof happy. The trip back was even harder. The cart's wheels squeaked and got stuck in the cracks of the sidewalk. The weight of the bags pulled my shoulders down. The midday heat soaked my back in sweat. I had to stop twice in the shade of the trees to catch my breath. But I did not care. As I walked, I was planning the meal, calculating cooking times, imagining my grandson's face when he saw the cookies. I reached my street past 1 in the afternoon. From the corner, I could see the reddish shingle roof and the large black iron gate that guarded the entrance. I pushed the cart up the tiled garden path. Anthony's rose bushes were thirsty under the relentless sun. I will water them later, I thought, sighing with relief as I reached the porch. I climbed the 3 concrete steps with difficulty, lifting the cart by sheer force. I left it to the side of the door and leaned against the wall for a moment to rest my back. The silence of the neighborhood was total, broken only by the distant chirp of a bird. I reached into my purse, an abyss of grocery receipts, tissues, and blood pressure pills, fumbling for the heavy leather keychain that Anthony had given me on our 10th anniversary. I found the key, old and thick, made of dull brass with edges worn down from decades of going in and out of that same lock. I held it between my fingers, trembling from exhaustion, and brought it to the door. I stuck the metal into the slot, or rather, I tried to stick it in. The key hit a metal stop just a few millimeters inside. I pushed a little harder, thinking that maybe the humidity had swollen the wood of the door, something that sometimes happened in the summer. But the key did not give. I pulled it out, puzzled. I looked at it under the sunlight to make sure I had not picked the wrong key on the ring. It was the correct one. I tried again, wiggling it gently from side to side, finding the angle, forcing the mechanism a bit. Nothing. The metal scraped against a foreign interior, producing a sharp sound that made my skin crawl. I frowned, confused. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand and put on the glasses hanging around my neck by a small chain. I leaned forward, bringing my face close to the sun-baked wood. The metal plate surrounding the keyhole was not the old, stained brass I knew by heart, the one with a small scratch on the left side from when Mark tried to pick the lock with a screwdriver as a teenager. It was a silver cylinder, polished, shiny, and completely new. A different lock. For a moment, my 71-year-old mind tried to cling to the most innocent logic. I thought that maybe the old lock had broken that very morning, and Mark, in an act of kindness, had called an emergency locksmith before heading to work. How strange that he did not call my cell phone to let me know, I said softly to myself. I raised my hand and knocked on the wood with my knuckles, slowly at first. "Mark? Rachel," I called out, bringing my mouth close to the door frame. "It is me, Martha. It seems the key is stuck." Peering out the large window of the master bedroom, the one I had given him, he was wearing the light blue button-down shirt, the exact same shirt I had hand-washed the night before to remove a grease stain, scrubbing the fabric in the laundry sink until my wrists ached. He was leaning on the windowsill, looking down at me with an expression I could not recognize at first. There was no worry on his face. There was annoyance and a shadow of mockery at the corner of his lips. "What is wrong, son?" I asked him, raising my voice so he could hear me from the yard. "I think the door is broken. My key will not go in. Come down and open it for me, please. I have the raw meat and the sun is very strong." "We changed the locks. Go to a hotel," he yelled, and the echo of his voice bounced against the walls of the neighboring houses. I stood paralyzed. The hot air stopped entering my lungs. The distant traffic noise seemed to completely disappear, leaving only the sound of my own heart buzzing in my ears. My fingers loosened their grip, and the leather keychain fell to the concrete floor with a dry, metallic clatter. "What are you talking about, Mark?" I managed to articulate, my voice trembling, feeling the ground beneath my feet lose its solidity. "Do not be ridiculous. Open the door. I have the groceries for the week. Nicholas's cookies are going to melt." Rachel and I have talked about this at length. We need our own space. We are sick of not having privacy, of not being able to invite our friends over because your old junk takes up the whole house, of you always being stuck in the kitchen. We live here. We are raising our son here. You have already run your course. You are coughing all day, dragging your feet, complaining about your aches and pains. It is depressing. We packed up your things early this morning. They are in some black trash bags behind the large planter, right there on the porch. Behind the immense terracotta planter where I grew ferns, there were 3 heavy-duty black plastic bags tied off with duct tape. 3 bags, 40 years of my life. Anthony's keepsakes, my dresses, my shoes, my photographs, everything packed away like garbage for the sanitation truck to haul off. Rachel's shadow appeared behind my son. She did not even have the courage to show her face completely. I only saw her hand resting on Mark's shoulder and heard her muffled, annoyed voice. "Tell her not to make a scene in the street. The neighbors across the way are already staring. Tell her to take her trash and go downtown. If you try to break down the door or make a scene, I am calling the cops and telling them you are disturbing the peace." Any other woman my age would have thrown herself on the ground to cry, scratching at the new wood of the door, begging for the love and compassion of the son she had carried in her womb. She would have screamed her dead husband's name, cursing the heavens for the injustice. But not me. I stayed perfectly still. In that moment, under the scorching sun burning my shoulders, I felt something physical happen inside my chest. It was not a heart breaking into pieces. It was a door slamming shut, a heavy deadbolt made of cold iron sliding into place with a silent final thud. For decades I had been an endless well of patience, of forgiveness, of hot meals, of clean clothes, and of justifications. I had excused every dirty look from Rachel, every slight from Mark, every lack of respect, convincing myself that they were young, that they were stressed, that a mother's love meant enduring it all. I had been the unconditional guardian of their well-being, willing to give every last drop of my blood for them. But the guardian had just been forcibly stripped of her post, and that immense, soft, maternal love, which forgave everything, evaporated from my body in a fraction of a second, drying up like a drop of water on a hot iron skillet. The affection was extinguished, leaving behind neither fire nor uncontrolled rage, but a solid block of ice, an absolute clarity as sharp as a butcher's knife. The devoted mother died on that porch. In her place stood a cold, calculating sentinel who had just realized that the enemy was sleeping in her own castle. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the shopping cart, the premium meat I had paid for with my hard work, the ripe tomatoes, the sweet cookies for the grandson I was not allowed to see. Things bought with love for people who considered me garbage. I slowly crouched down, picked up my keychain from the ground, and tucked it into my skirt pocket. Then I walked with a slow and steady pace down the tiled path until I reached the center of the yard. There, under the protective shade of the oldest rosebush, was the small wooden bench that Anthony had built with his own 2 hands. I sat down carefully, feeling the relief in my battered knees. I placed my heavy purse on my lap and settled my back against the rustic backrest. I looked toward the house, the brick facade, the gleaming windows, the well-kept lawn. Mark and Rachel were inside, probably laughing, hugging, congratulating each other on having the guts to kick out the annoying old lady and take over the house. They believed that by going to the hardware store to buy a new lock and screwing it into the front door, the power was theirs. They believed they had left me on the street defenseless, forced to wander the city looking for charity or to beg them on my knees to let me sleep in the hallway. I adjusted my glasses on the bridge of my nose. I reached into my purse, bypassing the keys, which were now useless, the tissues, and the medicine. My fingers found the cold plastic of my cell phone, an old device with big buttons and a small screen, the kind Mark always made fun of, saying I did not have the mental capacity to understand modern technology. I took it out and held it in the palm of my hand. What my son, in his infinite arrogance, his immense ignorance, and his blind cruelty, had completely forgotten was a small practical detail about how the adult world works, a structural, everyday detail that did not require lawyers or notary signatures or screaming matches in the middle of the sidewalk, a miscalculation so monumental that it was about to bring down his little fantasy of power in a matter of minutes. I dialed from memory, slowly and precisely, the customer service number for the electric company. I brought the device to my ear, listening to the ringing tone while staring fixedly at the closed second-floor window. They wanted their space. They wanted their absolute independence. They had slammed the door in my face, convinced that they now ruled the kingdom. They had no idea that the person they had just thrown onto the street was the only one holding up the invisible foundations that made that kingdom work, and I was about to turn their lights out. The plastic of the phone burned under the midday sun, but my fingers, used to holding hot pots and steaming irons, did not tremble as they pressed the keys. The screen's glare barely let me see the numbers, but it did not matter. I knew the sequence by heart. It was the same number I had called every month, religiously, for 30 years, to make sure my family never had to eat dinner in the dark or freeze in the winter. The difference was that today, that same methodical devotion was going to serve a completely opposite purpose. I held the device to my ear. The ringing tone sounded 3 times before a metallic, pre-recorded voice flooded the line. Thank you for calling Southern Power and Electric. For balance inquiries, press 1. To report an outage, press 2. For account ownership and service disconnection, press 3. I pressed the 3 with the tip of my thumb, applying a sharp force. The silence in the yard was absolute. From my spot on the wooden bench under the protective shade of Anthony's rosebush, I had a perfect view of the house's facade. The second-floor windows were locked tight. I knew exactly what was happening in there. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, was probably adjusting the central air conditioning thermostat to fight off the scorching afternoon heat, while Mark, my son, was surely pouring himself a glass of ice water from the refrigerator dispenser that I myself had cleaned the night before with baking soda and vinegar. They thought they were the kings of the castle because they had swapped a brass lock for a silver cylinder. Southern Power and Electric, Gabrielle speaking. How may I help you? The voice on the other end of the line was young, professional, and devoid of any emotion, a perfect contrast to the silent hurricane raging in my chest. "Good afternoon, Gabrielle. This is Martha," I replied. My voice sounded firm, without the slightest trace of the tears any 71-year-old woman would have shed after being tossed out on the street like a bag of trash. "I am calling to request the immediate and permanent disconnection of electrical service at my residence." There was a brief pause, the sound of rapid keyboard typing. "I understand, ma'am. To proceed with any structural changes to the account, I need to verify your identity. Could you provide me with your account number, please? You can find it in the top right corner of your bill." I did not need to dig for any bill in the abyss of my purse. I closed my eyes for a second and visualized the yellow paper that arrived every month. 8402-91. "Correct," Gabrielle murmured. "Social Security number?" I recited it without hesitation. "Date of birth?" I gave it to her. "Exact amount of your last payment made 10 days ago?" "You are the sole registered account holder for this service," the operator confirmed. "I must inform you that by requesting a permanent disconnection, any future reactivation will require a new contract, the payment of a connection fee, and the presentation of updated property deeds. Are you aware of this?" "Yes." "I see in the system that your address has one of the new smart digital meters installed last year. This means we do not need to send a technical crew to physically cut the wires. The power will be shut off remotely from our central office. The process will take a maximum of 10 to 15 minutes to take effect." "Perfect. Execute the order, please. And thank you very much for your efficiency, Gabrielle." I hung up the phone. The final click echoed in my head like the sound of a hammer hitting a nail. I stood still, breathing in the thick summer air, feeling the sweat bead on the back of my neck. I looked at the house again, and as I waited for time to pass, a sharp, heavy, and dark memory surfaced from the depths of my mind, superimposing itself over the brick facade in front of me. It happened 15 years ago on a November night when the rain was pounding against the windows with unusual fury. Anthony was still alive. Mark was barely 25 years old, and he had just totaled a sports car he had bought on credit, convinced that his administrative assistant's salary would allow him to live the lifestyle of a manager. That night, Mark had stumbled into our kitchen, soaked, crying crocodile tears, begging us to save him from the debt collectors who were threatening to repossess everything down to his clothes. Anthony, with that endless patience that always characterized him, pulled his savings from his retirement and paid off our son's debt. Mark went to sleep in his old bedroom, relieved, without offering a single, sincere thank you. But when the house fell silent, Anthony did not come back to bed. I found him sitting at the kitchen table under the dim light of the hanging lamp. His hands were resting on a brown cardboard folder. They were a working man's hands, full of calluses, permanently stained with paint and motor grease, hands that had raised every wall of this house. I sat across from him. Anthony pushed the folder toward me. Inside were the property deeds, the water, electric, and gas contracts, the tax records. "Martha, listen to me closely," he told me that night, and his voice sounded older, more tired than it should for his age. "I went to the notary this morning. I put everything, absolutely everything, exclusively in your name. The bills, the utilities, the house, all of it." "But Anthony, we are both the owners," I protested, not understanding the urgency in his dark eyes. "No, Martha, you are going to be the sole owner. Promise me." Anthony took my hands, squeezing them with a force that scared me. Our son. Mark has a hole in his pocket and a bigger one in his character. He believes the world owes him everything just for breathing. He does not know how to build, Martha. He only knows how to consume. If I am gone one day, and you hand him even a small piece of control, he will sell the chair you are sitting on. He will leave you on the street without looking back. Promise me you will never let go of these papers. Promise me that the control of this house dies with you. I promised him, crying, frightened by his prophetic tone. I promised him. Anthony died of a massive heart attack barely 6 months after that conversation, and for 15 years I kept that promise in silence. When Mark and Rachel moved in, temporarily, 5 years ago, I never mentioned to them that the house was not in my name and my late husband's name, but solely and exclusively in mine. They assumed what most arrogant children assume, that old mothers are just a formality, a temporary obstacle before the inevitable inheritance, incompetent beings who do not understand paperwork or bureaucracy. A sudden sound snapped me back to the present. It was a mechanical groan, deep and hollow. The motor of the central air conditioning unit outside, which was installed on the side of the house and had been humming for hours to keep my executioners cool, coughed, sputtered, and shut down completely. The metal blades slowed down until they stopped with an agonizing screech. Immediately after, silence fell over the property. I looked toward the living room window. The small green light of the internet router, which always blinked visibly through the glass, had vanished. The daytime darkness had reclaimed the interior. The power company had delivered. Mark and Rachel's world had just ground to a halt. I looked down at my feet. My plaid canvas cart was still there, full. The premium ground beef was starting to sweat through the white butcher paper. The tomatoes were warm to the touch. I was not going to let the food I had bought with my meager pension rot in the sun. I stood up, feeling a pop in my right knee, but the pain felt distant, irrelevant. I grabbed the cart's handle and started walking, not toward the street, but toward the left boundary of my property, where a small hedge of low bushes divided my yard from the neighbor's house, Agnes's house. Agnes was 75 years old, the widow of a military man, and had lived on that same plot since before the street was even paved. We had shared recipes over that fence for 4 decades. When I reached the bushes, I did not have to call her. Agnes was already there. She was standing on her back porch holding a garden hose with which she was pretending to water some begonias, but her dark, knife-sharp eyes were locked on me. She wore her pristine apron and her white hair pulled back in a strict bun. "I saw everything, Martha," Agnes said, shutting off the hose valve. Her voice held no pity or sorrow. It held military indignation. "I saw when that idiot son of yours yelled at you from the window. I saw the trash bags. I was about to call the cops myself for elder abuse." "No need for the cops, Agnes," I replied, pushing my cart through the small wooden gate that connected our yards. "Do you have room in your fridge? I bought meat and I do not want it to spoil. It cost me a lot." Agnes did not ask useless questions. "Come in. I just cleaned out the freezer this morning. There's plenty of space." We went into her kitchen. It was a cool place, smelling of lavender and polished wood. The pendulum clock on the wall marked the steady rhythm of a house in order. We opened the packages. Agnes arranged the meat in her freezer, put the tomatoes in the crisper drawer, and placed my grandson Nicholas's butter cookies on the granite counter. While we worked in silence, Agnes prepared a pitcher of iced tea with lemon. She poured 2 tall glasses, full of ice cubes, which clinked against the glass. "Sit here," she ordered me, pointing to a chair by her kitchen window, which offered a diagonal and perfect view of the side yard of my house, exactly where the fuse box was installed. "Drink. Your lips are dry." I took a long sip. The cold liquid went down my throat, clearing my thoughts even further. "The power just went out at my house, Agnes." "And it is not coming back," I said, staring through the lace curtains of her window. Agnes stopped with the pitcher in her hand. A slow smile, loaded with a wicked and supportive understanding, formed on her wrinkled face. "Ah, I see. So that is how we are playing it?" She sat across from me, resting her elbows on the table. "They are going to boil alive in there. It is the worst heat wave of the year." We did not have to wait long. Barely 5 minutes later, the side door of my house swung open violently. Mark stepped outside. Agnes and I watched him from the cool shadows of the neighbor's kitchen. Mark was wearing the same light blue shirt I had washed for him, but now it had large, dark sweat stains under the arms and down the center of his back. His face, once pale and mocking, was red from the heat and frustration. He walked with heavy steps, holding his cell phone in one hand. He walked straight to the gray breaker box set into the brick wall. He pulled open the metal cover impatiently. He started flipping the switches, slamming them up and down, cursing out loud. "Damn it!" he yelled, hitting the box with a closed fist. "The whole neighborhood has power except us." Mark walked toward the fence, trampling the flower beds I had weeded myself just last Sunday. "Mom!" he shouted from his side of the property, poking his head over the bushes. "What the hell did you do? Why are you hiding in Agnes's house?" I stood up slowly, taking my glass of iced tea, and walked toward Agnes's back door. I stepped out onto the covered porch, keeping a safe distance, but close enough for him to hear me with absolute clarity. "I am having a glass of tea, Mark. It is very hot out," I replied. My voice was flat, devoid of any maternal tone. It was the voice of a stranger. Mark gripped the branches of the hedge, breaking some leaves in his nervousness. The power went out, the fridge shut off, the AC is not working, and Rachel is hysterical because there is no internet and she cannot post her photos. "Did you touch something on the meter before you left?" "You are always ruining things, Mom. You are a damn burden. Tell me what you touched so I can fix it fast." That word, burden. He had used it so many times over the last few years, always in whispers when he thought I was not listening or in arguments with his wife. A burden who cooked, a burden who cleaned, a burden who paid the property taxes. I took a sip of tea. The ice made a sharp, crystalline clinking sound. "I did not touch the meter, Mark," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "I simply called the electric company and canceled my contract. Since you told me I no longer live there, that I have run my course, and that it is your house now, it felt wrong for me to keep paying for a utility I am not going to use. I am an older woman. I have to be careful with my pension." The realization took a few seconds to pierce my son's thick skull. He blinked, stunned, letting go of the branches. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. When he finally managed to articulate words, his tone tried to revert to the arrogance of the morning, but it was tinged with undeniable panic. "You are crazy," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are completely out of your mind if you think this childish tantrum is going to get you the house back. You are a bitter old woman. It does not matter. I do not need your handouts. I will call the company myself right now and have them reconnect the service. I have the money to pay for it, and when they do, I am going to report you for sabotage." "Go ahead," I replied, without changing my tone. "Call them." Mark took a step back, held up his latest model smartphone, the one he paid sky-high monthly installments for, and dialed the number, furiously. He put it on speaker at full volume so I could hear his victory. The sound of the call echoed in the hot garden air. Agnes peeked out from behind me, arms crossed, enjoying the show with a stone-cold smile. The same metallic voice answered. Then the system transferred him to a human operator. This time it was a young man. "Southern Power and Electric, Charles speaking. How can I help you?" "I am Mark, the owner of the property located at 42 Elm Street. Someone just cut off my electrical service by mistake, and I need it reactivated immediately. It is an emergency. I have a small child in the house." "Let me check the system, sir," the operator replied. We heard the sound of typing for 10 agonizing seconds. Mark looked at me with a triumphant smile, nodding his head, convinced that his masculine authority would be enough to undo my supposed tantrum. "Sir, I have the account in front of me," Charles said through the speakerphone. The service was not cut off by mistake. The exclusive account holder, Mrs. Martha, requested a permanent disconnection of the contract a few minutes ago. Yes, I already know that," Mark interrupted, losing his patience and raising his voice. "My mother is an old woman who does not know what she is doing. She had an episode of mental confusion." "I am her son, and I live in that house. I am ordering you to reverse that cancellation right now and turn the power back on." There was an icy silence on the other end of the line. When Charles spoke again, his professional tone had acquired an institutional hardness. "I am very sorry, sir, but that is absolutely impossible. You are not listed as the account holder, nor a co-signer, nor an authorized contact on this account. Due to strict security and privacy policies, you cannot conduct any business on a contract that does not belong to you." "But I live there. That is my house," Mark yelled, his face blood red, completely losing his composure. "If you reside at that address and wish to have electrical service, you will need to request a new contract in your name," the operator explained with the relentless monotony of bureaucracy. "To do so, you must appear in person at our main office. You will need to bring your state ID and, mandatory, the original property deed in your name, or, failing that, a notarized lease agreement signed by the legal owner. Once the documents are presented, the process for a new connection takes between 48 to 72 business hours." The phone almost slipped from Mark's sweaty hands. The silence that took over my son was absolute, heavy, devastating. Reality had just hit him in the face with the force of a freight train. He did not have the property deed. He did not have a lease agreement. He had absolutely nothing in his name that legally tied him to the ground he was standing on. He was a legal ghost, living in someone else's house. He had changed the physical lock on a wooden door, blinded by his own ignorance, forgetting that in the adult world, true control is not held with keys but with papers, signatures, and titles. "But I do not have—" "My mother has the papers," Mark stammered, and for the first time in 30 years I heard true terror in his voice. His gaze lifted from the phone and locked onto me. There was no more mockery. There was no more contempt. There was only the look of a terrified child who has just realized he broke something he does not know how to fix. "Would you like me to schedule an appointment at a branch for you to present the documentation, sir?" Charles asked, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in the yard. Mark ended the call. His hand fell limp to his side. Sweat slid down his temples. He looked at the lifeless house behind him. Then he looked at me. "Mom?" he whispered. His voice was shaking. The afternoon heat seemed to crush him against the dry grass. "What have you done?" Agnes followed me back, letting the screen door slap shut behind us. I sat down at the table again and picked up my cell phone, resting next to the glass of iced tea. "Agnes," I said, without taking my eyes off the small, bright screen. "Would you do me a favor and pass me your local phone book? The one you keep next to the microwave?" My neighbor walked over to the shelf. She grabbed the thick book of yellow pages and dropped it onto the table with a thud. "Who are you going to call now, Martha?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with pure anticipation. I unlocked my phone and started dialing a new sequence of numbers. "The City Water and Sewer Department," I replied, resting the phone against my ear and listening to the first ring. They also have a remote shutoff system, and as I recall, Rachel hates not being able to shower when it is hot out. "Northern Water Utilities. My name is Lauren. With whom am I speaking?" The sound anchored me to the present, pushing away for a moment the vision of my paralyzed son under the midday sun. I settled into the wooden chair in Agnes's kitchen, rested my elbows on the sunflower print oilcloth, and took a deep breath. The cool indoor air contrasted violently with the firestorm brewing in the house next door, where the silence of the dead motors announced the beginning of the end. "Good afternoon, Lauren. This is Martha," I replied, keeping the same firm, emotionless tone I had used minutes earlier. "I need to request the immediate and permanent disconnection of the water supply at my residence." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the rapid tapping of a keyboard. Unlike electricity, water has always been a more grounded, more physical utility. It does not travel through the air, nor is it shut off by pressing a button on a distant screen. Water runs through pipes buried in the mud, through veins of copper and plastic that my late husband had helped install with his own 2 hands. "I understand, Mrs. Martha," the operator said, regaining her professional tone. To process a permanent shutoff, we must first verify your identity as the exclusive account holder. Please give me your account number, your social security number, and the exact date of the last payment registered in our system. I recited the numbers from memory, with the precision of someone who has managed scarcity for decades. Every digit was a reminder of the silent sacrifices I had made to keep that home afloat. The times I had walked in the rain to pay the bill before the due date. The times I had mended the same gray skirt so the money would stretch to cover the summer rates. Lauren confirmed the data with a murmur of approval. "Everything is in order, ma'am. The system indicates that you have a flawless payment history for over 35 years, the operator commented with a hint of genuine respect in her voice. "However, I must inform you that our protocol for disconnecting the water supply is different from other utilities. We do not have remote shutoff valves in your area. To interrupt the flow, we need to send a technician from our crew to manually close the main valve on the sidewalk and place a security tag along with a cast iron padlock. Do you agree to this procedure? Furthermore, I must warn you that any attempt to force, break, or tamper with the company's padlock by third parties constitutes a federal offense for tampering with public infrastructure, subject to severe fines and possible criminal prosecution. If someone needs to reactivate the service, they must appear at our offices with the original property deeds in their name to request a new meter. Do you understand the implications, ma'am? I will send the dispatch order right away. They will be there in approximately 20 minutes." I thanked the operator and hung up the call. I left the phone on the table next to the glass of iced tea Agnes had poured for me. My neighbor watched me from the other side of the granite counter, arms crossed with an expression that mixed astonishment with profound military satisfaction. She did not say a single word, but she did not need to. We both knew the final gear of the trap had just been set in motion. The afternoon heat kept intensifying, crushing the neighborhood under a blanket of heavy, still air. The asphalt on the street seemed to be melting, blurring the outlines of the trees in the distance. Inside my house, the temperature had to be rising at an alarming rate. It was a solid build, designed to trap heat in the winter, which turned it into an unforgiving oven during the summers without the help of the central air conditioning that Rachel kept blasting at all hours. As we waited in the cool silence of Agnes's kitchen, my mind drifted backward, dragged by the mention of the pipes and the shutoff valves. I remembered a Sunday afternoon, almost 30 years ago. Mark was a skinny kid who barely reached my waist. Anthony had decided to replace the old lead pipe in the front yard with a new PVC one, worried about the quality of the water we drank. He had spent the whole weekend digging a deep trench in the hard dirt, his hands full of blisters and his shirt soaked in sweat. I had asked Mark to go out to the yard to hold the flashlight for his father as the sun began to set. But Mark had refused, throwing a tantrum in the living room, complaining that the dirt would ruin his new sneakers and that he would miss his favorite TV show. Anthony, with that endless patience that eventually cost him his life, had told me to leave him alone, that he could finish up by himself in the dark, and he did. He built the foundations of that house while his son watched television. That was Mark's tragedy. That was his fundamental flaw, the structural defect in his character that had led him to commit the stupidity of changing the locks this morning. Mark had always believed that things simply appeared, that water came out of the faucet by magic, that electricity turned on the light bulbs by divine right, that hot food materialized on the dining room table because he deserved it. He never understood the effort, the sweat, the blood, and the paperwork that held up the illusion of his comfort. By swapping the brass cylinder on the front door, he thought he was taking control of a kingdom. He did not realize that he was only claiming an empty box, a useless shell, because the true power over that land and everything that fed it was etched into a notarized document resting safely in a bank deposit box, in my name and only my name. His arrogance had blinded him to the most basic reality of the adult world. You cannot claim ownership of what you have not built or legally paid for. The throaty rumble of a diesel engine pulled me from my thoughts. Agnes and I approached the kitchen window at the same time. A large, heavy white utility truck with a blue logo of the Northern Water Utilities painted on the side doors turned the corner and rolled slowly down the street. The tires crunched on the hot asphalt as it stopped right in front of my driveway, partially blocking the view of the front yard. A man stepped out from the driver's side. He was a sturdy, broad-shouldered worker, dressed in a dark blue uniform, steel-toed boots, and an orange reflective vest that glared under the relentless sun. He wore a cap with a frayed brim and held a thick clipboard in one hand, while with the other he carried a heavy metal toolbox. He walked with a determined stride toward the sidewalk in front of my property, right where the small iron grate protected the water meter and the main valve. The technician, whose name tag identified him as Owen, knelt on the boiling concrete, inserted a pry bar into the slots of the cover, and with a grunt of effort lifted it, tossing it to the side with a dull clang that echoed down the quiet street. He reached his gloved hands into the dark hole and began to manipulate the shut-off valve. Not even 30 seconds passed before the front door of my house yanked open violently. Mark shot out onto the porch, almost tripping over the 3 black trash bags holding my belongings. His appearance was deplorable. The light blue shirt, which hours earlier looked immaculate, was plastered to his torso with sweat, huge dark stains expanding across his chest and back. His face was flushed, red from the suffocating heat inside the house and the sheer desperation consuming him. He bounded down the steps 2 at a time, ignoring the thirsty rose bushes, and ran toward the curb. Hey, you! What the hell are you doing?" Mark yelled, throwing his arms up erratically as he approached the technician. Owen did not flinch right away. He finished turning the heavy brass valve with a giant wrench, completely cutting off the water flow to the property before looking up at my son. He stood up slowly, wiping the grease from his gloves on a rag hanging from his belt. His posture was relaxed but firm, that of a man used to dealing with angry customers on a daily basis. "Good afternoon, sir. Routine work," Owen replied, in a deep, monotone voice that carried clearly to Agnes's window. "I have a direct order from Central to perform a physical and permanent shut-off of the supply at this address. The account holder requested the disconnection a few minutes ago." No, that is a mistake," Mark exclaimed, stepping dangerously close to the worker. Small drops of spit flew from his mouth. "I am the owner of this house. I live here. My mother is an old woman who lost her mind and is making fake calls to mess with me. Open that valve right now. I have my wife inside dying of the heat and the faucets just spit out mud." My work order specifies that Mrs. Martha, the exclusive account holder, requested the shutoff. If you claim to be the legal owner of the property, I need you to show me the original property deed in your name this very second, along with your state ID to stop the procedure. If you have them, I will verify them and leave the water connected. If you do not have them, I have to do my job." Mark stood petrified at the edge of the curb. His hands, which moments before were waving in the air with indignation, fell heavily to his sides. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in his dry throat. He looked toward the house, then toward the company truck, desperately searching for a way out, an excuse, a lifeline, to rescue him from the tide of reality that was drowning him. "No, I do not have the papers here right now," he stammered, losing all the fake authority he had tried to project. "They are put away, but I swear this is my house." "I will give you $50 right now if you leave the valve open and pretend you were never here." The expression of bureaucratic neutrality on Owen's face disappeared instantly, replaced by a cold, professional hardness. "Keep your money, boss, before I call the cops for attempted bribery of a public utility worker," Owen warned, taking a step forward and using his physical size to intimidate Mark, who instinctively stepped back. "I do not care if you have all the money in the world, no papers, no water, period." Without giving my son time to answer, Owen knelt over the grate again, reached into his toolbox, and pulled out a solid iron padlock, thick as a man's fist, attached to a braided steel cable. He threaded it through the holes in the brass valve, making sure it was physically impossible to turn it without destroying the entire pipe. The metallic sound of the padlock snapping shut with a dry, final click echoed in the hot afternoon air. Then he took a bright red plastic security seal with a printed serial number and tightened it around the mechanism. He pulled a small electronic tablet from his vest pocket, took 2 photos of the finished job, and stood up, dusting off his knees. "The meter is locked and sealed," Owen announced, staring hard at Mark, who was looking at the heavy iron padlock as if it were an alien artifact. "I will remind you that trying to break that lock, cut it with a saw, or tamper with the seal is a federal offense. If we detect vandalism on the infrastructure, the company will press criminal charges against the residents of the property. If you want water, go to the main office tomorrow morning with the deed in your name and request a new contract." "Have a good afternoon." Owen grabbed his toolbox, turned his back on my son, climbed into the white truck, and started the engine. The vehicle drove off down the street, leaving a cloud of dust that slowly settled over the thirsty rose bushes. Mark was left alone on the sidewalk, his shoulders slumped, defeated by the weight of his own ignorance. There were no more shouts, no threats, no cruel laughter from a second-floor window. There was only a grown man realizing, with paralyzing terror, that he had built his supposed independence on a sandcastle, and the tide had just rolled in. He crouched down, grabbed the bars of the small iron grate, and slammed it down over the hole in a fury, producing a loud crash that made dogs bark in the distance. At that exact moment, the front door opened again. This time it was Rachel who stepped out onto the porch. If Mark looked bad, my daughter-in-law looked like she had just crossed a desert. She was wearing a silk blouse that used to be impeccably white, but was now stained with sweat and clinging to her skin. Her dark hair, which she always kept perfectly straightened, was messy and plastered to her damp forehead. She had traces of dried soap on one side of her neck, and her eye makeup was smeared, giving her an unhinged look. The heat inside the house, devoid of ventilation and with the windows hermetically sealed, had forced her outside in search of breathable air. "Mark!" Rachel screamed in a high-pitched voice that bordered on hysteria. She stumbled down the steps, dodging the garbage bags. "What is going on?" I was trying to wash my face in the guest bathroom and the faucet started spitting air and rusty mud. "The toilet is not working. There's not a single drop of water in the whole damn house." "Did you fix the electricity? The fridge is defrosting and Nicholas's milk is going to go bad." They put an iron padlock on the valve. "We cannot open it." Rachel stopped dead in the middle of the lawn, blinking in confusion. "What do you mean they put a padlock on it? Call a plumber. Break it with a hammer. Do something for the love of God. We cannot stay inside here with no water and no AC in 100-degree heat. The only way they will turn our utilities back on is if we go to the main office with the deed to the house in my name." She looked at her husband. The man who had assured her that very morning that changing the door lock was enough to take possession of the property and rid themselves of the annoying old woman who demanded respect. "But you do not have the deed, Mark," Rachel yelled, losing any trace of decorum. "You told me you had everything under control. You swore to me that your mother could not do anything, that she was just an ignorant old woman who did not understand the law. What good is having the key to a house where we cannot turn on a light, flush a toilet, or take a damn shower?" Her eyes crossed the yard and stopped at the low hedge dividing our property from Agnes's. Through the open window of the neighboring kitchen, she saw us clearly. Blinded by rage and the heat, Rachel marched heavily toward the property line, trampling the daisy flower beds I had watered so carefully the night before. She grabbed the chain-link fence hidden behind the green leaves, shaking it violently. "Martha!" she shrieked, her face distorted. "Come out of there, you old witch! I know you can hear me. Call that company right now and tell them to take off that damn padlock." "We have a small child. Nicholas is going to be home from school in a few hours, and he is going to die of heat stroke in this house. Is that what you want? To kill your own grandson?" "Nicholas gets out of school at 4 in the afternoon, Rachel," I said, with an icy calmness that seemed to infuriate her even more. The tone of my voice was low, but it cut through the hot air like a scalpel. That is 3 hours away. More than enough time for 2 successful, independent adults who own their own space to find a nice hotel with air conditioning and a pool. After all, you were the ones who changed the locks this morning and told me to go find lodging. I guess you will just have to follow your own advice now. "This is our house!" Rachel screamed, punching the fence with a closed fist, scratching her knuckles on the branches. "You have no right to do this to us. You just changed a cheap piece of metal on a wooden door. But the walls, the roof, the wires that bring the electricity, and the pipes that bring the water, all of that belongs to me. You acted on something that was never yours. You played at being the owners with my dead husband's money and sweat. And now you are going to have to learn to live in the desert you created yourselves." Mark came running up next to his wife, grabbing her arm to try and pull her away from the fence. He looked me in the eyes, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the scared little boy who used to hide behind my skirts when there was a thunderstorm. But the tenderness that used to respond to that look was dead and buried. "Mom, please," Mark begged with a hoarse voice. "We cannot stay inside. The house is an oven. The food is going to spoil. We have nowhere to go. Please fix this." "I did not break anything, Mark. Therefore, I have nothing to fix," I replied, turning around in silence. "Enjoy your privacy." I walked back into Agnes's kitchen and let the screen door shut behind me. Through the mesh, I saw Mark and Rachel stand in the yard for a few more minutes, arguing in desperate whispers, before being forced to retreat back inside the house to escape the relentless sun burning their skin. The sound of the front door closing behind them sounded like the lid of a coffin sealing shut. Agnes looked at me from the table with a crooked smile of pure admiration. "They will not last 2 hours in there, Martha," my neighbor said, taking a sip of her iced tea. "In this heat, with no water and no fans, they are going to cook in their own juices. They will have to run out of there with the boy as soon as they pick him up from school. And when they leave for the hotel, they are going to lock that door with the new key they bought." I walked over to the table and sat across from her. I looked at my own glass, watching the ice slowly melt, turning into cold water. Agnes was right. Mark's stupidity in changing the lock had left them trapped in an uninhabitable property, but it also meant that once they abandoned the sinking ship, I would still be unable to physically enter my own home. My belongings, 40 years of my memories, were still packed in 3 humiliating black trash bags on the porch, rotting in the sun as if my entire life were just waste they could dispose of. They had made the fatal mistake of acting on what they did not control, and the consequences of that mistake were already suffocating them. The trap had closed on them by its own weight. Now all that was missing was the final blow. All that was left was to reclaim what was mine and expose the magnitude of their failure to the eyes of those who mattered. I looked up at my old friend. The sentinel inside me was ready to take back her castle, but this time the door would not be opened with patience or forgiveness. "Agnes," I said with a firm voice, feeling the exhaustion of my 71 years completely vanish, "do you still have your nephew's phone number? The one who has the shop downtown? The locksmith?" Agnes widened her smile, a dangerous glint lighting up her dark eyes. She nodded slowly, getting up from her chair to fetch the small address book she kept in the silverware drawer. "Yes, of course I have it," Agnes replied, pulling out the book and handing me a pen. "Do you want him to come over and quietly open the door for you when they run off to the hotel? Because tonight when the sun goes down, that lock is changing again, and I want to make sure everyone hears it." Agnes did not need to be told twice. With an agility that defied her 75 years, she picked up the receiver of her landline wall phone, that cream-colored device she had kept since the 80s, and dialed her nephew's number. I stayed seated at the oilcloth table, listening to the rhythmic tick-tock of the pendulum clock, feeling how the adrenaline that had kept me on my feet for the past few hours was beginning to turn into a cold, heavy, and calculated patience. The sentinel I had become was in no rush. I had waited 5 years to get my space back. I could wait a couple more hours to watch my son's house of cards collapse under its own weight. "Derek? Hi, sweetie?" "Yes, it is Aunt Agnes," my neighbor said, resting a hand on the counter. Her tone was casual, but her eyes shone with fierce intensity. "I need an urgent favor, one of your special jobs. Yes, right next door at Mrs. Martha's house. They played a dirty trick on her and changed the cylinder on her front door. I need you to come bust that lock and install the best one you have in your shop. The heaviest one, the most secure one. Bring the industrial drill." "Yes, that exact one. The one that makes a racket like 1,000 demons. At 5 in the afternoon? Sounds perfect to me. We will be waiting for you with cold lemonade." Agnes hung up the phone and gave me a smile that was half comfort and half a promise of war. She poured me some more iced tea and sat across from me. We did not talk much over the next hour. There was no need. We both kept our eyes fixed on the kitchen window, which gave us a perfect panoramic view of the side of my house and the front facade. The afternoon crept by with a suffocating slowness, dragging with it the worst heat wave the city had seen in years. From our privileged, cool vantage point, we could watch the sun relentlessly punish the brick structure of my home. The heat was so intense that the air above the asphalt on the street seemed to ripple, distorting the image of the trees and the parked cars. My house, built by Anthony with thick walls and heavy insulation to withstand harsh winters, was rapidly turning into a convection oven. Without the air conditioning running and with all the windows tightly shut on Rachel's orders to maintain her precious privacy, the heat was building up inside with no way to escape. I knew that house better than the back of my hand. I knew exactly what was happening in there, room by room, minute by minute. Mark's mistake had not simply been a lack of respect or a spoiled child's tantrum. It had been a monumental miscalculation. By changing the lock on a property he did not legally own, he had acted on an illusion. He had believed himself the master of the place for having a new key in his pocket, completely ignoring that a house is not just wood and bricks. A house is a living organism that needs electricity to breathe and water to clean its veins. By trying to strip me of my authority, he himself had cut off the vital supplies to his own shelter. His stupidity had lit the fuse, and now all he could do was sit and sweat while the bomb went off. Around 3 in the afternoon, the first signs of internal collapse began to show. We heard a dull thud coming from the second floor, followed by the sound of a window being shoved open. It was the master bedroom window, the same one Mark had yelled at me from hours earlier. Rachel's head popped out through the gap. She was desperate, searching for a breeze that did not exist. The outside air, heavy and loaded with humidity, entered the room, but it brought no relief, only more heat. From a distance, I could hear her high-pitched voice, screaming at Mark. The exact words were lost in the thick air, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of panic. Without water, the toilets in the house could no longer be flushed. With the extreme heat, the smell of dry pipes would start rising through the drains. Without electricity, the massive double-door refrigerator that Rachel had bought on credit was defrosting rapidly. The meat, the milk, the vegetables, everything I had cared for with such dedication was now rotting in the dark. The modern, private refuge they longed for so much had transformed into an unsanitary prison in record time. The neighborhood, which usually took a nap at that hour, began to wake up, drawn by the unusual activity and the abnormal silence of the dead motors. Mr. Peterson, a retired man who lived in the house across the street, stepped out onto his porch with a hose to water his potted plants. He stood at the edge of his lawn, staring intently at the facade of my house. He knew, just like all the neighbors who had been on the street for decades, that the air conditioning at our house never turned off in the summer. Mrs. Miller, 2 houses down, came out with her broom under the pretext of sweeping the sidewalk, but her eyes never left the open window where Rachel was still screaming. The community, the same one that had watched me sweep, paint, and tend to that yard for 40 years, was silently gathering to witness the fall. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, the distinct squeak of a school bus's brakes broke the monotony of the heat. The yellow transport stopped in front of my house. The folding doors opened and Nicholas, my 7-year-old grandson, stepped down the stairs with his small blue backpack on his shoulders. The boy walked slowly, dragging his feet, exhausted from the school day and the afternoon heat. Before Nicholas could even reach the tiled path in the yard, the front door of my house flew open with a violence that made the frame shake. Mark and Rachel ran outside as if they were fleeing a fire. The sight of them both was pathetic, a very public fall from grace unfolding in broad daylight. Mark's shirt was completely soaked, clinging to his body, and his face was distorted by frustration and defeat. Rachel, on the other hand, looked like she had lost her mind. She was dragging 2 huge rolling suitcases across the wooden porch floor, clumsily pushing past the black trash bags containing my belongings, the ones they had packed for me that morning. The impact of the hot outside air seemed to hit Nicholas, who stopped dead in the middle of the lawn, looking at his parents in confusion. "Mom, it is so hot. I want cold water," the boy whined, rubbing his sweaty eyes. "There is no water, Nicholas. There is nothing in this damn house," Rachel screamed at him with an aggression that made me clench my fists under Agnes's table. The woman dropped the suitcases, which landed with a thud on the concrete, and ran toward the boy, grabbing him roughly by the arm. "We are going to a hotel right now. Unlock the car, Mark. Unlock the damn car before I pass out." The spectacle of the new owners fleeing in terror from their own domain was an absolute confirmation of their failure. "I told you to fix it," Rachel shrieked as she shoved the boy into the back seat of the car parked on the street. "You promised me that by changing the lock, that old woman would go to a nursing home and we would have peace. Look at us, Mark, look at us. The house smells like rot, the food is ruined, and I have not been able to take a shower all day. You are useless." They had planned a clean, quick, hostile takeover, but their own ignorance about how the real world worked had cornered them. From the window, I watched Mark slam the trunk shut. Then he turned toward the house, walked back up the path, dodging the rose bushes his father had planted, and climbed the porch steps. He stopped in front of the solid wooden front door. It was at that exact moment that my son made his final and greatest mistake, the final act in a chain of stupidities that would seal his fate irreversibly. Mark reached into the pocket of his damp pants and pulled out the new key, that shiny, gleaming key that fit the silver cylinder he had installed that very morning. He slid it into the lock, twisted his wrist hard, and heard the metallic click of the latch securing the door. He locked it. In his small, arrogant mind, he believed that by doing so, he was protecting his territory. He believed that even if he was forced to temporarily flee to a hotel to escape the suffocating heat, the house was still his, because he controlled the physical access. What he did not understand, blinded by panic and wounded pride, was that by abandoning the property and locking that door, he was leaving the space completely defenseless. His original mistake had forced him to evacuate, and now his second mistake was handing the keys to the castle, metaphorically speaking, directly into my hands. He had just sent himself into exile. Mark put the key back in his pocket, cast one last defiant glance toward Agnes's house, believing I was hiding and crying, and ran back to the car. He started the engine with a revving roar, and the tires squealed against the hot asphalt as the vehicle sped away, disappearing around the corner. Silence descended upon the street once again. The dust kicked up by the wheels slowly settled over the dry leaves. The house stood empty, mute, baking under the sun. On the porch, the 3 black garbage bags were still there, untouched. Agnes let out a long sigh beside me, resting her hands on the table. "They are gone," my neighbor murmured with a satisfied smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "They fled with their tails between their legs, just like the cowards they are." "Yes," I replied, standing up slowly, feeling that the stiffness in my knees had vanished, replaced by an ancient, determined strength. "But they left the door locked, and it is time to open it. We did not have to wait much longer. It was 10 minutes to 5 when an old dent-covered work truck parked exactly where Mark's car had been. On the side, hand-painted letters read, "The Anvil Locksmith, 24-hour service." Derek stepped out of the truck. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered, with tattooed arms and a thick beard sprinkled with gray, wearing a gray work shirt stained with grease. Agnes went out to the back porch to greet him, and I followed her, walking across the grass toward the edge of my property. "Hi, Auntie," Derek greeted her in a raspy voice, giving Agnes a kiss on the cheek before turning to me and respectfully taking off his cap. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Martha. My aunt gave me a quick rundown of the situation. She said we have a problem with a new cylinder on your front door." "That is right, Derek," I nodded, pointing at the house. "My son decided to change the lock this morning without my permission. I need to get into my house, and I need you to make sure that the new key he took with him never works again." Derek nodded, his face adopting a purely professional expression. He walked to the back of his truck and opened the metal doors. He did not pull out delicate lockpicks or thin wires. He pulled out a heavy toolbox, a claw hammer, a steel chisel, and an industrial power drill with a thick extension cord. We crossed the front yard together, Agnes on my right, Derek in the lead. The neighbors, who had not moved from their observation posts, followed us with their eyes. Mr. Peterson leaned against the low fence dividing our houses, and Mrs. Miller took a step forward on the sidewalk. No one said a word, but everyone knew exactly what was about to happen. They were my silent witnesses, the popular jury validating my claim. We walked up the concrete steps. The 3 trash bags greeted me like a physical reminder of my son's cruelty, but I ignored them, stepping right over them. Derek knelt in front of the door, setting his open toolbox on the wood. He examined the silver cylinder gleaming in the sun. "This is a cheap piece of junk, Mrs. Martha," Derek said, spitting on the floor in disdain. "Cheap metal. He bought it at some big-box hardware store for $20. Whoever installed this knows nothing about security. They thought the shine would scare off burglars." "Destroy it," I ordered, without changing the tone of my voice. Derek plugged the extension cord into a portable generator he had brought in the truck, knowing there was no electricity in the house. He grabbed the heavy drill, inserted a titanium bit designed to pierce solid steel, and pressed it directly into the center of the keyhole. He squeezed the trigger. The noise was deafening. A sharp, violent screech ripped through the silence of the hot afternoon. The sound of metal being ruthlessly shredded echoed off the walls of the neighboring houses. Silver shavings began to fly into the air, falling like rain onto Derek's work boots. The smell of burnt oil and metallic friction filled the porch. It was an ugly, brutal sound, but to my ears, it was the symphony of justice. It was the sound of Mark's illusion being smashed to pieces, the physical destruction of the only mechanism of control he thought he had. It took barely 40 seconds. With one final push, the drill bit tore through the core of the cheap lock. Derek turned off the drill, took his chisel, wedged it into the destroyed hole, and gave it a sharp strike with the hammer. The entire cylinder gave way, breaking loose from the wood and falling to the porch floor with a pathetic clinking sound. Derek pushed the handle and the heavy wooden door creaked, swinging wide open. A wave of stagnant, dense heat with a faint smell of humidity and rotting food hit us in the face. The house was submerged in daytime shadows, hot as the inside of a furnace, empty of life and arrogance. I took a step inside, feeling the hardwood floor beneath my shoes, recognizing my territory. "All done, ma'am," Derek said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. From the bottom of his toolbox, he pulled out a heavy cardboard box. "I brought you what my aunt asked for, a solid core, hardened brass deadbolt with anti-pick pins and keys that cannot be copied. It costs a pretty penny, but I swear to you, they could not blow this door open with an army tank. Install it. I will pay whatever it costs," I replied, opening my purse to look for the emergency cash I kept tucked away. Derek worked fast and with the precision of an artisan. He removed the remains of the broken mechanism, cleaned the splintered wood, and fitted the heavy new piece of dark brass into place. The contrast with Mark's shiny piece of junk was absolute. This was not a decoration. It was an unbreakable declaration of ownership. While he screwed the security plates into place, Agnes helped me drag my 3 trash bags into the entryway. My 40 years of life were returning to the place they never should have left. 10 minutes later, Derek handed me a ring with 4 heavy keys, featuring a complex design and sharp edges. I paid him in cash, adding a generous tip that he tried to refuse, but which Agnes forced him to accept with a stern look. "Anything you need, Mrs. Martha, you know where to find me." Derek said his goodbyes, packed up his tools, and walked down the steps. He started his truck and drove away, leaving behind a silence that now felt clean, purified by action. Agnes and I stayed on the porch, feeling the warm afternoon breeze as the day began to wind down. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky in shades of orange. I held my new keys in my hand, feeling their comforting weight. Suddenly, the sound of an engine revving to the max shattered the calm. A car rounded the corner, skidding slightly, and slammed on the brakes in front of my house, jumping 1 tire up onto the curb. It was Mark's car. The driver's door opened before the engine was even fully shut off, and my son shot out. He was alone. His face, which hours before showed the fury of his retreat, now reflected pure, absolute, uncontrolled panic. He was running toward the house, breathing heavily, looking frantically at the ground and then at the door. In his right hand, he clutched the new key, the shiny piece of junk he thought was his life insurance. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, but stopped dead in his tracks when he reached the top step. He came face to face with Agnes and me, standing under the frame of the open door. His eyes dropped to the lock. He saw the huge block of dark, hardened brass now guarding the entrance. He saw the silver metal shavings scattered across the wooden floor, and then he saw the ring of heavy keys that I calmly held in my right hand. My wallet," Mark stammered, his voice trembling, taking a hesitant step forward. His arrogance was completely gone, swept away by the brutality of his own incompetence. I left my wallet on the kitchen counter. In the dark, rushing out, I did not realize it. All my credit cards are in there, my ID. They will not let me check into the hotel. I have no way to pay for the room. I need to go inside for a second. He raised his hand, holding up the useless key, as if hoping that by some magic the cheap metal would fit into the wood again. I looked at my son. I looked at the 30-something man who had believed he could erase me from my own history by changing a deadbolt. His mistake, his lack of understanding of how the world around him was sustained, had taken him from being the master of the castle to a beggar at his own door in less than 8 hours. He had no house, no utilities, and now, due to his own carelessness in the frantic escape he had caused, he did not even have an identity or money to buy shelter. The neighbors were still there, Mr. Peterson with his arms crossed on his lawn, Mrs. Miller standing firmly on the sidewalk. They were watching the man who tried to throw his mother out on the street beg for a piece of plastic just to be able to sleep in a bed. "This house is closed, Mark," I said, my voice sounding firm, echoing across the porch and reaching the ears of everyone present loud and clear. There were no screams, no tears, no drama, just the coldness of a done deal. "You changed the rules yourself this morning. You told me to find a hotel. I guess you will have to find one that takes guests without ID or sleep in the car with your family." "Mom, please," he begged, taking another step, his eyes filling with tears of frustration. "Just let me go in for 1 minute to get my cards. Rachel is in the car with the kid crying from the heat in the hotel parking lot." "You acted on something that did not belong to you. You decided you could dispose of my life. Everything that is happening to you now is a consequence of your own decisions. There is no wallet that will save you from your own stupidity." I took a step back, into the dark, suffocating house that now belonged entirely to me. I looked Mark in the eyes one last time, seeing how the total, crushing realization of his defeat paralyzed him on the porch. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, I pulled the heavy wooden door shut. The new solid brass deadbolt clicked into place with a dry, heavy, and final sound, leaving my son outside, exposed to the neighborhood, holding a key that no longer opened any door in the world. The echo of the brass deadbolt reverberated through the dark entryway, traveling through the floorboards and up through my ankles, marking the absolute end of a tyranny I myself had allowed for far too many years. I stood motionless in the shadows, resting my forehead against the warm wood of the front door. Outside, silence had returned to the street, broken only by the hollow sound of Mark's footsteps walking away down the tiled path, dragging his feet like a man condemned to exile. I heard the engine of his car start with a muffled roar, and the tires squealed against the asphalt as he drove away forever from the fortress that, in his infinite arrogance, he thought he had conquered with a cheap piece of metal. I turned around and faced the belly of my own house. The heat was a physical entity, a thick, oppressive wall that squeezed my chest and made it hard to breathe. Without the constant hum of the central air conditioning, the silence was tomb-like, almost unnatural for such a large building. It smelled of stale air, overheated dust, and a sickly sweetness that was beginning to emanate from the kitchen, where the leftover food Rachel kept in the massive double-door fridge was starting its rapid decomposition process. I walked slowly down the hallway, guided by the dim orange evening light filtering through the slats of the tightly shut blinds. My knees protested with sharp pains, swollen from the stress of the day, but my mind was sharper and clearer than ever. I reached the kitchen, resting on top of the massive black granite center island that my daughter-in-law had demanded be installed last year, complaining that my old tiles made the house look miserable, lay the object that had sealed my son's absolute defeat, Mark's dark brown leather wallet. It was half open, revealing the edges of his gold credit cards, a wad of cash, and the corner of his ID, the passport to his fake independence, abandoned in the rush of his own stupidity. I did not touch it. I looked at it with the same clinical indifference one uses to observe a dead leaf fallen in the garden. It was the symbol of his arrogance, and now it was the lead anchor keeping him sunk in the misery of the street. Suddenly, 3 sharp taps on the glass of the back window pulled me out of my trance. It was Agnes. Through the heat-fogged glass, I saw her holding an LED camping lantern and a small, hard plastic blue cooler. I walked to the back door, unlocked the deadbolt, and let her in. The warm outside breeze, though heavy with summer air, felt like heavenly relief compared to the stagnant oven my kitchen had become. "He is gone for good," Agnes said, setting the cooler on the table and turning on the lantern, its bright white light casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. I saw it from my porch. He was walking hunched over, staring at the ground like he was looking for answers in the concrete. He got in his car and did not even have the guts to look back. Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Miller stood on the sidewalk until the car disappeared around the corner. "The whole neighborhood knows what happened, Martha. The whole neighborhood witnessed the trash taking itself out. I just followed your instructions. Come stay in my guest room. It has a great ceiling fan." "No, I am not going to wait for Mark to borrow money from a friend, rent a moving truck, and come back tomorrow afternoon playing the victim to demand to come inside and pack up his things. I am not giving them the satisfaction of walking my halls again. When the sun comes up tomorrow, there will not be a single trace of them left on this property." She saw the icy determination that had replaced the devoted mother I used to be. She nodded slowly, without trying to talk me out of it. She left the lantern on for me, along with 2 more bottles of ice water and a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil, promising to come back first thing in the morning. When I heard the latch of the back door close behind her, I was completely alone in the scorching silence of my reclaimed castle. I finished drinking the water, tied my gray hair into a tight bun at the nape of my neck, and walked to the garage. I shined Agnes's lantern. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating Anthony's dusty tools and a stack of large, sturdy, corrugated cardboard boxes I had saved from the last time we bought appliances. I grabbed a roll of industrial packing tape, a black marker, and started carrying the boxes up the main staircase 3 at a time. The heat on the second floor was even more oppressive as the hot air had gathered under the shingled roof. I walked into the master bedroom, that sanctuary I had shared with my husband for decades, and which, 5 years ago, I had surrendered in a misunderstood act of love. Under the lantern's beam, the room looked foreign. Rachel had taken down my hand-embroidered floral curtains and replaced them with sterile gray blinds. She'd banished my solid oak furniture, installing metal and glass shelving units that looked like they came straight out of an office catalog. I set the lantern on one of those cold shelves and began the purging process. I opened the massive doors of the sliding closet. Rachel's clothes, meticulously color-coded on black velvet hangers, gave off a scent of expensive perfume, dry cleaning and suffocating stale air. I started taking them down one by one. I did not throw them in a rage, I did not rip them, and I did not toss them on the floor. Uncontrolled anger no longer lived in my body. I folded them with the exact same flawless mechanical precision I used to use to iron my grandson's school uniforms, stacking silk blouses, linen pants, designer skirts, and evening gowns at the bottom of the cardboard boxes. I did the same with Mark's suits, with his light blue shirts identical to the one he was wearing when he yelled at me from the window, with his ties and polished shoes. The physical effort was monumental. My hands, deformed by arthritis, cracked with every movement. The sweat soaked my cotton dress, sliding down my back and stinging my eyes. The pain in my lower back became a constant hot, stabbing sensation that forced me to stop every 15 minutes to stretch my spine and take a sip of the ice water Agnes had left me. But the pure, crystal-clear adrenaline kept me going. Every folded shirt was a grievance erased. Every packed pair of shoes was a silenced insult. Every box sealed with packing tape was a restored boundary they would never cross again. I moved on to the dresser. I emptied the drawers full of Rachel's cosmetics, her imported creams, her costume jewelry, and Mark's paperwork. I left absolutely nothing. I packed Nicholas's toys into a separate box, feeling a pang of sadness when I touched his small plastic cars, but immediately remembering that unconditional love did not mean allowing his parents to trample all over me in front of him. By 4 a.m, the master bedroom was completely empty, stripped of any trace of their parasitic occupation. All that remained were bare walls and silence. I grabbed the boxes, which weighed like lead, and began the most dangerous task, dragging them down the hallway and sliding them very carefully down the wooden steps to the first floor. My arms trembled from extreme exhaustion, and I had to sit on the bottom step for half an hour, breathing heavily in the dark, waiting for my heart to stop beating so violently against my ribs. By 7 a.m, when the first rays of a pale, threatening sun began filtering through the slats of the blinds, the entryway of my house looked like a logistics warehouse. 18 cardboard boxes, perfectly sealed and labeled, formed an impenetrable wall in front of the armored front door. Next to them rested Mark's wallet, placed on the highest box like the cherry on a bitter cake. At exactly 8 o'clock, the unmistakable sound of a heavy, asthmatic diesel engine shattered the morning calm of the neighborhood. I peeked through the living room window, pulling the blinds back slightly. An old moving truck, rusty and with peeling paint, parked right in front of my gate, in the exact spot where the water company vehicle had stopped the day before. Mark stepped down from the passenger side. He did not come with Rachel. He came accompanied by a young guy dressed in paint-stained work clothes, whom I vaguely recognized as Jake, one of the mechanics at the dealership where my son worked. Mark was a mere shadow of the arrogant and cruel man who had looked out the window 24 hours earlier. He was wearing the exact same wrinkled, sweat-stained clothes from the day before. His eyes were bloodshot, His hair was a mess, and deep, dark circles under his eyes gave away a night of absolute insomnia, probably spent in the reclining seat of his car or on the hard sofa of some distant relative. He walked, dragging his feet, hunched over beneath the invisible weight of his own stupidity. He pushed open the small iron gate to the garden and walked up the tiled path. He climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of the door. He raised his right hand and with trembling knuckles gave 2 soft, pathetic knocks against the solid wood. I turned the heavy brass deadbolt. The metallic click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning. I opened the door only halfway, blocking the frame with my own body, holding an upright posture that belied my knees, which were shaking from the exhaustion of a sleepless night. The stagnant heat of the house clashed with the cool morning breeze. Mark looked up. His lips trembled, searching for words that were now useless. Before he could articulate a single syllable of a hollow apology, I raised my left hand and handed him his precious leather wallet. He took it with clumsy fingers, looking at it as if it were a foreign object. Then his eyes drifted toward the inside of the entryway, discovering the wall of 18 perfectly stacked cardboard boxes. The sheer scale of my overnight labor seemed to hit him physically. He understood in that instant that there would be no negotiation. There would be no tears, no yelling, no forced reconciliation. The eviction was total, final, and irreversible. "Your things are ready, Mark," I said, with a voice so flat and devoid of emotion that it seemed to scare him more than if I had screamed at him. "Take them right now. I do not want this truck blocking my street." Agnes, of course, was standing on her side porch, arms crossed, a smile of military satisfaction carved into her face. Mark felt the weight of those stares drilling into the back of his neck. The public humiliation, the raw exposure of his failure in front of the people he considered beneath him, shattered him completely. He gave a weak signal to Jake, and the two began the grueling, pitiful task of carrying the heavy boxes from my entryway to the bed of the truck. It was a silent, pathetic parade for 2 hours. 2 hours in which my son had to walk under the rising sun, carrying the weight of the material life his wife had accumulated, exposed to the relentless scrutiny of the community. I did not move from the doorframe. I stood there like a pillar of salt, watching to make sure they did not touch the walls, that they did not scratch the wood floors, ensuring that his retreat was as clean as it was final. When Jake loaded the final box onto the truck and closed the rear metal doors, Mark stood at the bottom of the porch. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. He looked at the rose bushes his father had planted. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were welling with tears of frustration and defeat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, taking a hesitant step toward the first stair. "Please. Rachel is hysterical in her sister Jenna's apartment. The 3 of us do not fit in that miserable place. I have no money for a new emergency deposit. Do not do this to me. I am your son. You only know how to consume. You have none of that. Now leave and do not ever step foot on my sidewalk again." I carried my canvas bag, but this time it was not full of grocery receipts. Inside rested the thick brown cardboard folder Anthony had given me on the night of the storm. My first stop was the main office of the Northern Water Utilities. The air conditioning in the massive customer service lobby dried my sweat immediately. I pulled a number and waited. When they called me, I presented my ID and the original stamped and notarized deeds that proved Martha was the sole and absolute owner of the property. The employee verified the watermark, entered the data into the system, and with a polite smile issued the reconnection order. "We will send a technician out immediately to remove the physical padlock, Mrs. Martha," the young man assured me. From there, I walked 2 blocks to the imposing glass building of Southern Power and Electric. The process was even faster. The operator scanned my deeds, verified my identity, and pressed a few keys on her computer. "Service has been restored remotely, ma'am. The power is already working at your residence," she informed me, handing me back my precious papers. I returned to my house past noon. Opening the front door with my heavy new key, I was greeted by a wonderful symphony. The deep, constant hum of the central air conditioning flooded the hallway, pushing out blasts of freezing air that instantly swept away the stagnant heat of the previous night. The massive refrigerator in the kitchen was humming loudly, regaining its cooling cycle. I stepped out into the front yard just in time to see Owen, the same sturdy technician in the orange reflective vest, kneeling in front of the grate on the sidewalk. He greeted me by respectfully touching the brim of his cap as he cut the red seal and removed the heavy cast-iron padlock. He turned the brass valve, and I heard the distinct hiss of pressurized water running through the underground pipes toward the heart of my house once again. I went inside and turned on the kitchen sink. The water sputtered trapped air and a bit of reddish sediment for a few seconds before flowing clear, cold, and abundant. I washed my face and hands, feeling like I was washing off years of invisible humiliation. But victory required cleaning. I spent the rest of the afternoon purging the house of the infection. I took out massive black garbage bags, ruthlessly tossing the rotten meat, the spoiled milk, the wilted vegetables, and the expensive dressings Rachel had abandoned in the defrosted fridge. I scrubbed the glass shelves with bleach and hot water until the sickly smell was completely gone, replaced by the sterile, clean scent of bleach. I opened all the windows for an hour to let the fresh evening air circulate, sweeping out the final shadows of the invasion. 3 months have passed since that scorching summer Tuesday. Autumn has arrived in the city, bringing with it crisp breezes that make the dry leaves crunch on the sidewalks. The house is mine again, body and soul. My old Singer sewing machine has returned to its rightful place, right in front of the large master bedroom window, where I can watch the street while I work. Rachel's gray blinds ended up in the trash, replaced by my embroidered floral curtains that wave gently in the wind. News from the outside reaches me through Agnes, who has an enviable network of informants across the whole district. Mark and Rachel ended up taking refuge in her sister Jenna's tiny apartment. Rumor has it screaming matches can be heard through the thin walls of the building. My son's arrogance broke completely when he was forced to work double shifts at the dealership and weekends at a local mechanic shop just to try and pay off their accumulated debts and save for an apartment deposit that seems out of reach. The house of cards collapsed on their heads, crushing their marriage under the weight of the financial reality they had always ignored. Nicholas, my grandson, comes to visit me every Sunday afternoon. Mark is the one who brings him. He parks his car on the corner, several yards away from my property. He opens the door for the boy to get out and stands next to the vehicle, his eyes glued to the asphalt, never daring to cross the imaginary line of my sidewalk. He never looks up at the house. His punishment is not just living in the misery he caused himself. His true punishment is knowing that paradise was within his reach, and he changed the lock himself to stay locked out. I walk out to the porch to welcome my grandson with open arms. Today, I have prepared the dough for the meat pies, kneading the flour and shortening on the black granite counter that I now enjoy in absolute solitude. The boy runs to me, his mouth already stained with anticipation, and I hug him, wrapping him in the smell of home-cooked food and clean laundry. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Agnes walks through the small wooden side gate. She brings a fresh pot of coffee with her. We sit together on the rustic bench in the protective shade of the rose bushes Anthony planted, the ones I now water religiously every morning and which have bloomed with astonishing vitality. I look at the facade of my house, the solid brick walls, the windows glowing with warm light from the inside, the immaculate lawn. I reach my right hand into the pocket of my cotton apron, and my fingers brush the cold, heavy surface of my new, solid brass key. I do not need to pull it out to know it is there, anchoring me to the earth that belongs to me by right, by effort, and by law. I take a sip of coffee, listening to the sound of my grandson's laughter playing in the living room, and I smile in the perfect silence of a house that finally breathes in peace.